Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm so excited to welcome you today. This podcast is all about helping you get more adventure and more time outside in your life, however that looks, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. Each week, we try to offer practical tips for vehicle-based adventuring and interviews with folks that are outside doing it, as well as stopping to break down some of the mental hurdles. And so that's what we're going to focus on in today's episode. We are going to be discussing the question that always finds a way back into my life. And it's really simple, but it's funny how often I need to be reminded of this. And the question, which I came across in a little art and journaling book that a friend had in DC back in 2014. I loved it so much that I cut it out and put it right next to my desk at work, or a copy of it anyway. And I've had it next to my work desk ever since. And the question is simply, what's stopping you? What's stopping you? And I find it's such a good question to come back to whenever I'm feeling a little bit stuck in life in terms of my goals, where I want to go, if there's an activity that I want to get involved in, an adventure that I want to plan or want to do, but just feel a little bit stuck. And if I ask myself the question, what's stopping you? No, seriously, what exactly is stopping you? And I really break it down and think through it on multiple levels. I find that is often enough to get me unstuck. So today I want to discuss a couple examples from my life. I also want to tie in some of what we've heard in our recent interviews and looking at the specific decisions that they made around starting some of their adventures, or sort of the key pivotal moments for them, and how they found a way to break past those barriers to get beyond just dreaming and actually doing it. And this is one of the most interesting aspects I've found from talking to people who are really just embracing life, embracing the adventures, and sort of living into the lives that they want to create, is how they get over this hurdle of having this nice dream in their head and then making it a reality. And just want to focus some time today thinking about how we move from the idea to action. And I can specifically relate it to overland in a few examples as well. And so I'll tie in those in terms of thinking through barriers that might be stopping you from getting out camping more or overlanding more, and how to break past those, or what you can do to kind of break it down into next steps that you can take to get closer to those overlanding or camping goals that you might have. I'll also be referencing a couple other podcasts or overlanding resources if you want to dig deeper into any of the folks that I'm mentioning and hear more about their stories, see what resources they offer or what sort of communities they are promoting. And so I'll have all of those resources linked as usual on blueyonderadventures.com. following me posting this show on Thursday. And I'll also try to highlight some of those on Instagram or Threads at blueyonderjen. And as always, if you've got follow-up questions or ideas that you'd like to dig deeper in onto this podcast, feel free to shoot me a direct message or a comment at blueyonderjen at Instagram or Threads. And now, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Okay, so we're diving into this question, what's stopping you, and seeing how it relates to you getting more adventure, more nights outside, or just embracing whatever sort of adventure it is that you really want to pursue, but feel stuck on or feel like you just can't quite get there. So I'm going to start this discussion with when I first encountered this question and how powerful it turned out to be for that particular year in my life back in 2014, 2015. And then I will take a look at how I've been using it this spring in both relation to overlanding as well as some creative business ventures. And then I'll bring in some examples from some of the overland guests that I've had in terms of how it relates to adventure planning, and then break down specifically for you, if you're asking this question about some of your camping and overland adventures, what are some practical resources to help you overcome some of the answers that you might have when asking yourself this question, what's stopping you? So like I said, I first encountered this question back in 2014. And this was a pivotal moment in my life where I was going through divorce. I was working a job in DC that was in a field I loved, humanitarian aid, but I was an executive assistant and I knew I wanted to go deeper or do more. I was partway through a graduate degree that I was doing at night. But I knew for my field, the fastest way to progress in humanitarian aid is to get a posting overseas. And so as all of that was unfolding in the fall of 2014, I decided what I really, really wanted to do was pursue getting an internal transfer job with my organization overseas by the end of a year-long lease that I had just signed with a girl that I met in my grad school night classes who turned into one of my best friends that year, Jordana, shout out. And so I kind of gave myself, okay, we've signed a year-long lease. I really want to make this happen. Like, how do I get overseas? And at first it was just sort of daunting. I didn't really know where to start. And around that same time, I came across this question in a book. I believe it was owned by a friend, Emily, who was super creative and just always challenging me with the way she engaged with the world and thought about things in a really practical way of asking, what's stopping you? So shout out Emily Cerniker if you ever listen to this as well. We've lost touch recently, but she's doing some amazing poetry and creative related endeavors, I believe, in the New York area. And so this question, what's stopping you, popped into my life. And I made a little copy of it, put it next to my desk at work, and tried to engage with it every day. And the more I asked myself this question, I was like, okay, you really want to work overseas, international aid. I kind of went and browsed the jobs. I was like, okay, right now, could I realistically land any of these open roles that are open in my organization overseas? And I'd go through the job postings and find that, of course, I didn't have the requisite experience or the requisite language skills or whatever. And so asking myself the question, what's stopping you? I made a list of, okay, it looks like these are some of the skills where if I had them, I'd be much more competitive for these types of roles. So now how can I go get those skills? So one of them was grants and contract management. There was always jobs posted in sort of a grants management or grant writing roles, common in the nonprofit industry, of course, as a whole, but especially for overseas help with the complex grants and contracts that are available from a lot of worldwide government entities. There's just a lot of specialized and technical knowledge. And so I saw that as a way of like, okay, if I gain some knowledge in this area, I could differentiate myself and have a better chance of landing one of these roles overseas. So I went and took a grants workshop for, I think it was 2 full days, and it was covering all of the US government sort of contracting and grant rules, policies to be aware of, doing a deep dive on sort of how to be compliant with everything, how to manage these grants, how to write grants in such a way that they would check all of the boxes and the rules, everything to do with grants, cooperative agreements, and contracting. So some people might find this really boring, but it was super helpful, and it's been helpful at many other points in my career too. So it turned out to be a very flexible skill that I learned there. The other thing was, of course, language skills. And we were doing a lot of work in the Middle East and across Africa and in Asia, almost nothing in Latin America, which I had a little bit of Spanish background. That wasn't really going to help me with any of the internal roles that we had open. And so I thought that French would be the easiest transfer language from some of my Spanish skills, since they're both Latin-based. And so I signed up for a French class. And then as the year wore on, I also looked for any opportunity at work to put myself in contact with the folks working on our international programs, which was pretty easy to do being based out of our DC office, since everybody came through for meetings with various US government officials or lobbying Congress, etc. So that spring, I had the opportunity to help accompany our Turkey country director, who was implementing all of our programs, mainly doing cross-border aid into northern Syria, as he was doing a round of meetings with folks at the State Department and with some congressional staffers. I think he may have even gone to the White House. I didn't get the chance to do that, which would have been really cool. But long story short, found ways to start observing and getting in the room and meeting some of the folks that were decision makers for these types of roles that I was looking at, and starting to prove my competence to them and starting to beef up some actual tangible skills. But then as the year wore on and we got to the spring, summer, I think it was around June, I found myself getting nervous because we were approaching the end of this year-long lease period. And I think I had started applying for anything I saw that spring, but just wasn't hearing much back. I had done some informational interviews. I was asking folks for advice, mentoring, etc. I was doing all the things that you would expect. And so far not landing anything. And I started getting feeling a little frustrated and stuck as I approached that summer, because I knew that my self-imposed deadline was looming at the end of August. And I just didn't feel any closer to achieving this goal, even though I felt like I had done everything I could think of. So once again, I visited this stupidly simple question: what's stopping you? And I asked myself, okay, I kind of flipped it around and I said, okay, if you were given the opportunity tomorrow, congrats, you've landed this job in whatever random country you want to choose on the globe. Say it's Jordan in the Middle East. You've landed this role in Jordan. That was one of the roles I actually applied for. You'll be based in Amman, Jordan. Congrats. You need to fly out in 2 weeks. I asked myself, would I actually be ready to go in 2 weeks? Like, say I landed this job. Yeah. Would I be ready to pack up and move overseas in 2 weeks? And I realized the answer was, of course not. Like, that's ridiculous. I was nowhere near ready to go. I had a ton of personal items. I had furniture. I had way too much stuff. I was never going to be able to move it all. So I realized, okay, one thing I could be doing is paring down my stuff. So I started doing that, either getting rid of things like furniture or my record collection, artwork, things like that, to my roommate or other friends that I knew wanted it, or donating clothes that I knew I probably wasn't going to take with me, purging my closet, all of those things where it's like, this is just a good idea to do this, but it gets me just that baby step closer to being ready to grasp this opportunity when it comes along. And so I found kind of in the second phase that it was really helpful to sort of turn the question around and say, okay, great. You're given your dream opportunity tomorrow. Are you ready to seize it? And that helps me unlock so many different little actions that I hadn't been thinking about that whole spring and get me prepared. So things like making sure my passport was up to date, making sure that I had standard vaccinations for places where I was going to be potentially going, like yellow fever is a pretty common one if you're going to be living or traveling in Africa. And so most countries require a proof of yellow fever immunization. So going and getting that done, or things along those lines. And also making sure that I had luggage or a bag that I knew I was going to take with me. So that was an awesome gift my parents got me at one point that year, was sort of a giant overland camping backpack meant for backpacking and in the wilderness trips, but I knew I'd be able to use it no matter where I was going in the world. And so I was really excited to have that and start thinking through how to pack it, how to use it. And then all of this preparation and all of my obsessive thinking about how to break down these barriers to getting what I wanted finally came to fruition in July of 2015. And it was sort of hilarious how fast it all happened once it did start happening. In the span of roughly a week, I found out about an opportunity that was opening up in our Turkey office. And since I had already built relationships and asked for mentorship from a few different folks in our Middle Eastern programs, either based in New York or based in the region, I had multiple people reaching out to me and saying, hey, I think you'd actually be good at this posting. Let me know if you need any help. prepping for this or talking to the country director. Well, since I'd also already met the country director that spring, he also had me top of mind for this role. And it was kind of a limited term 6-month contract, but I knew it would be enough to get my foot in the door with these overseas program, and then trusted that from there, I'd be able to learn more on the ground, learn more just in the thick of it all, and transition to some sort of role within longer term. And so it was like once the universe started unfolding this next step in my life, it happened so quickly. And by the end of July, I was flying to Turkey for a week to start doing some trainings and workshops related to the new job. And then I was just waiting for my work visa to come through. It was a really slow time to get work authorizations in Turkey for international staff. And so it was basically checking with the Turkish embassy every day in DC, just waiting for that work visa to come through while I started working the job remotely in August. And I was just so incredibly grateful that I'd already done the work of going through and like starting to purge my belongings, thinking about how I would pack things for an overseas move, making sure I had the appropriate luggage, making sure vaccinations and stuff were up to date and my passport was up to date, and just could not have been more ready to jump at the chance, which worked out so well then for how fast this unfolded. And in the span of about 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe by the time I was waiting for the visa to go through, then was moving to Turkey. So that is the most powerful example for me of how this question really helped change my life, but also helped me embrace a dream that I had of working in international aid overseas. And not just the question, what's stopping you, but also flipping it around on its head and saying, okay, if you were given this dream tomorrow, could you embrace it? Could you jump on it? Could you grab it with both hands and actually make a go of it? And so as this spring has unfolded this year in 2025, about 11 years later after I first encountered this question, I've been asking myself things like, how do we get out camping when our primary overlanding vehicle is broken? There's been multiple different repairs and issues that have happened this spring with it. So right now we're without our most capable overlanding vehicle. We really just have a vehicle that's not built for overlanding with the tires and the suspension that it has. So we've been limited to campgrounds. I've been asking myself, though, what's stopping you? And especially now that we're back in the Pacific Northwest and we know a lot of these overland sites, we've mapped so much of this area. We know where technical sections are. We know where easy access points are to take friends that don't have capable vehicles as well. Finally, this last weekend, we were able to take advantage of that and use our not super capable vehicle to get to one of our favorite sites along the Hood Canal in Washington. And it was such a cathartic experience to get to go back and camp at one of our favorite spots, the first spot that Matt, my husband, ever took me overlanding, and get to just drink in the natural beauty and the views of this place and remember why we fell in love with camping in the first place. And again, we only really were able to do this because we thought, okay, what's stopping us? We can't access a lot of the sites we normally would, but we know this site, we know the road up, we know we've taken folks with just your standard street vehicles up there. We know that it could be done, and we're going to, take along any sort of extra gear and things we might need in case we run into problems, but we're pretty sure our vehicle can handle it. So we were able to get up there, even towing a trailer, and it was awesome. The other area I've really been asking this question of myself this spring is how it relates to my career path and creative endeavors. It's one of the things I asked in starting this podcast, what's stopping you? And realized that a lot of times it boils down to fear. And fear of putting yourself out there, fear of actually stepping into this dream, and what if it doesn't turn out the way you hoped? And I think that could be true for a lot of sort of life and creative endeavors where you might be facing some hesitation or or feeling a little bit stuck is a lot of times if you ask yourself this question of, well, what's actually stopping you from doing this? It might seem to be other things when you initially ask yourself this question, but when it boils down to a lot of the time is fear, at least for me. So for instance, starting the podcast, I knew I didn't have a lot of the technical knowledge, but my sister does. She had managed and produced a podcast for her work for a couple of years. So I knew she knew all the software, she knew all the things to look out for, pitfalls to avoid, things to keep in mind. And so I was already talking to her and she was happy to be consulted as needed for me to get this podcast off the ground. The other thing that was stopping me was, it's very important to me to have high quality audio and outputs. I really want it to sound professional and polished. So I'm going to need some sort of microphone. So I went out and bought one that was, pretty standard, recommended across the board. Going to get the job done. And at that point, then I realized I had a whole bunch of ideas written down. I had a technical expert I could call at any time. I had a microphone. I had basic software, even if it was trial versions of things. And so when I asked myself that question again, well, what's stopping you? It just came down to fear and nerves. Fear of putting myself out there. I hated the sound of my own voice, still kind of bothers me actually. But realizing that if that was the only thing stopping me, I just needed to get over that and just go for it. So launched the podcast at the end of January. It's been a wild ride. I've learned so much and I've been having so much fun with it. And as I'm in this weird transition between I ended up in a tech career after my nonprofit aid job, and that I knew wasn't going to be long term. And I was intentionally saving money there for when I could get out to launch my own business. But then in this weird period of trying to figure out exactly what that looks like as we move back to Kingston and what opportunities exist here in Kingston, Washington, I've just been asking myself that question a lot. I'll have to give you guys an update later in the year on how all of this turns out. I'm still very much in the thick of the journey. It feels like I'm surrounded by the tall trees of the Pacific Northwest. I have no idea where this road is leading me. And it's a little bit scary, but also for the first time in my life, I think I'm trying to be a little bit more patient with how this journey is unfolding and hoping that at the end of it, it leads me to some place that really resonates with me in terms of my love for the outdoors and adventure and creativity, and seeing how all of that could come together in a way that works for me and Matt and our life here in Kingston. And so whether it's creative endeavors, business endeavors, camping, overlanding, I've been applying that question so much in my life. And so that is also where I think it's been interesting, as I've asked so many folks now that I've interviewed for this podcast, how they got started in camping or overlanding. I've often been surprised at how simply or humbly a lot of them have gotten started. So Alex talked about getting started with just a Nissan Juke. Not really a big overland vehicle, but it was enough to get out car camping. And she didn't let its abilities stop her, just embraced it, jumped in, and found she loved it so much that eventually she did start acquiring more gear and eventually thinking about upgrading that vehicle. But diving in and getting started with whatever you have. And I found that same common thread in talking to Azure O'Neill, who is on staff at Overland Expo now. When she started overlanding, it was just out of a Toyota Camry. So certainly not a super capable off-road vehicle, but that's how she got her start. And then from there, getting into motorcycles. And she started that with a partner who rode motorcycles, and she was riding on the back, and then had a situation where things went wrong. Her partner, she wasn't sure if he'd be able to drive the motorcycle again or not safely. And so realizing that she really wanted to acquire the skills to be able to handle it herself. And so that's kind of what gave her the impetus to embrace learning about motorcycles, getting her license, getting her first one. But thinking back to her humble origins, just starting with a Camry, she had access to that. So let's embrace that and just get camping. And it was same with Amanda Zitto, talking to her last week and her embracing sort of whatever materials she could get access to. She talked about just getting pretty cheap camping equipment for her first moto camping adventure and regretting some of that as it wasn't insulated, wasn't very warm, but it was enough to convince her that she loved the experience and it was something she wanted to pursue longer term. And she could prioritize investing and planning for upgrades, but embraced getting started with whatever she had. I think when it comes to camping and outdoor adventures, one of the biggest areas where we can feel like it's stopping us from doing it is a lack of knowledge or skills. I know for myself, that was one of the things that really stopped me from overnights outside camping, backpacking. When I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I was really embracing all the hiking adventures, sort of all the outdoor activities that I could embrace in day trips or weekend adventures with friends, or even some camping adventures with friends. But I kind of kept waiting for a partner or a friend to come into my life who was already well-versed and well-prepped to do the adventures that I wanted to do. And when that didn't happen, by the end of 2020, I was finally starting to feel like I needed to quit waiting for some other person to appear in my life who would have the skills and knowledge to make me confident in going out and doing these overnight adventures. And I needed to just acquire that knowledge. And when I came across another podcast this spring in the outdoor space, I laughed because it resonated with me so much. So want to direct you guys, if you're interested, to check out this woman named Allison Boyle has an awesome podcast called The Adventurous Reinvention. And she does a whole bunch of different other things too, like organizing women's backpacking trips and cohorts of online workshops and classes together, and helping people break down barriers to getting them confidently out in the wilderness, backpacking and overnight adventuring. But Allison's origin story of how she got into it resonated with me so much because she talked about kind of waiting for friends to come along in her life or to invite her on adventures. That was how she did her first backpacking trip, was with a group of friends from work who were going. But then after that trip, she said she loved it so much and wanted that in her life more, and kind of kept waiting for invitations to pop up from this group, realized that they didn't actually go that often, nor were any of them particular experts. And so it finally dawning on her that she needed to become that friend. She needed to be the one who was confident in the skills, whether it was a little bit of basic first aid or how to set up camp or set up your camp cook stove, how to be cognizant of whatever wild animals and how to safely protect your food, etc., from them. She needed to go acquire those skills herself so that she was confident being the main driver or the impetus behind some of these camping adventures. And so that's what she did. It was like a light switch flipping on for her. And she decided to go acquire all of these skills herself so that she didn't have to wait around for invitations to adventure. She could be the one actually giving those invitations to adventure to friends. And I really loved how she really kind of flipped that on its head and turned it around, and then has now turned it into a whole business for herself, inviting others into more outdoor adventures and helping them up-level their skills, help them gain more confidence with the outdoor adventurous life that they want to lead. So really love that and the lessons there. If you want to check that out, it's The Adventurous Reinvention. And that just resonated so much with my own experience, where when I asked myself that question, what's stopping you? It was, I didn't feel confident in my skills. And so after I moved to Kingston, I think I referenced this on one of our first couple episodes, I signed up for a weekend backing trip. It was an intro to backpacking, and it was aimed at women, and it was run by a nonprofit called Wild Society out here. And they're based in Kingston, and they take, oftentimes it's youth trips. They've got some great youth programs, but they also do offer a couple of adult intro to backpacking weekends, and occasional will do a women's focused weekend. And so I signed up for that and went on that. And it was awesome. Just learning how to light different types of camp stoves. We had a couple different ones with us, and I went through and tried multiple times how to set it up, how to light it. So I was confident I could do it myself. I asked the guides excessive questions about food storage, about bathrooms and best practices, and how to set up your campsite and choose your campsite, what to think through, water systems, water filtration systems. We'll talk through it all. And it was fantastic to have that access to gear to really get your hands on and see how it worked, see if you could actually successfully use it and be able to ask questions of experts. And so then after that, I felt so much more empowered to start planning my own adventures and didn't feel like I needed to wait around for anyone. And ironically, of course, that's when I was reconnected with an acquaintance, Matt, who eventually became my husband. But it's funny how the world works, where sometimes it's just realizing you need to empower yourself with the skills or the knowledge that you're waiting around for somebody else to bring you. So that's where that question's been really useful for me as it relates to overlanding and camping and outdoor adventures, is just if I find the answer to that question of what's stopping me is lack of confidence or skills, then trying to find a way to bridge that gap for myself and not waiting for somebody else to do it. When it comes to overlanding, as I discussed with some of the guests that I've interviewed, Alex, Azure, Amanda, they all got started in whatever basic vehicle they had access to. So again, I would encourage you, if you're thinking about overlanding, dispersed camping outside of campgrounds, that's the biggest advice is not to let whatever vehicle you have access to stop you. It's just to take that into account with your trip planning and reading reviews ahead of time for what you can find online with different forums or things like Onyx or Gaia, trip reports, things like that, to see what conditions you might encounter and whether you'd be okay with your vehicle, as well as thinking through different recovery gear that you might want to bring with you. And on this topic, gear, I think that can also be a common response for what's stopping you is maybe you think you don't have a capable enough vehicle, or maybe you don't feel like you have the right gear or any gear to get out there and camp. And gear can be expensive, obviously. And while even access to some basic gear might feel out of reach, I want to encourage you. I've seen several really innovative solutions to this. One is gear libraries. So Wild Society, that I went on my first backpacking trip with, was great about this. They encouraged everybody to sign up for the trip, whether you have access to all the required gear or not. And when you sign up, to just let them know what you have access to, what needs you have, and then through their gear library and their sort of network of outdoor enthusiasts, they'll try to ensure that everybody that signs up for the trip has all their gear needs met, which is awesome. And I think most other organizations that are offering guided trips or intro trips for whatever type of outdoor adventure you're considering are often aware that newcomers aren't going to have the gear. And so they will offer ways for you to access it, to rent it, to borrow it, etc. You can also try to borrow it from friends who might have this gear already. And we've definitely done that if we're thinking about new adventure sport equipment, things like that, maybe borrowing a paddleboard or a kayak from somebody. But another innovative solution I've seen is in Seattle, at least, and I would be curious if this has popped up in other major cities in the US. There's a place called Gear House, which is sort of a membership-based approach to gear. And I love their philosophy because they believe communal ownership of a lot of this gear is probably the way of the future. Most people don't want or don't need to have every seasonal outdoor sporting equipment available to them all the time. It takes up so much room, especially if you live in a city. You might not have places to store it. And so some sort of communal ownership of this gear could actually be really useful. And that's kind of what they're promoting. So you could join Gear House. They have, it sounds like an awesome coffee shop and sort of community hub in Capitol Hill. But then they also have this extensive gear library of outdoor sporting equipment that you can check out as needed if you're a member. So I love that approach. There's also, of course, rentals, which is definitely available in most of the outdoor markets. We were just talking to Will Curry, who runs Camp Ridge Electric Adventure Trailers out of Edmonds, Washington. We interviewed him on the podcast a few weeks ago. And that's a great option if you're thinking about overlanding and getting started, or just getting started with some different gear that you might not be used to. Both Will and then I also mentioned Titus Adventures out of Denver, Colorado, where we just moved from. They also offer off-road vehicles and rigs, vans for rent. And there's lots of other outfitters like that available in various outdoor markets. So that can be a fun way to try out if you're considering. But all of that to say, you don't need to let a rig or gear be the thing that stops you. There are ways around that. What other things are holding you back from your adventurous pursuits, whether it's outdoors or maybe it's creatively? I would love to hear how you have gotten unstuck or the things that have provided some inspiration to you lately. I find those examples so uplifting, and they can help get other people unstuck too. So if you've got a particular quote or question or just tactic that you use, I'd love to hear about it. And if you've used the question of what's stopping you or a similar process, I'd also love to hear that. Reach out to me at blueyondergen on Instagram or Threads. Hey guys, if you made it all the way to the end, thanks so much for your time this week. And if you'd like to learn more specifically about overlanding and how to access campsites outside of the campground, I'd recommend revisiting our first couple episodes where me and my husband Matt dive into what exactly overlanding is, why we love it so much, and how to find good campsites outside of campgrounds. You'll find a lot more content, links to additional resources, and other awesome adventures to follow on our website for the show, blueyonder-adventures.com. And I'll also be sharing all of that content and links to others at blueyondergen at Instagram or Threads. I'll be back next week with more content, but in the meantime, we hope to see you out in the wild blue yonder.